Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, be sure to drop your thoughts, feelings, and lessons in the comments below. Like the video and subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Let's get into it. My wife made me sign a prenup that said I'd get $0. Then she smirked and told me it was proof I knew my place. When I inherited $20 million years later, she cried like she was the one who'd been wronged, then turned cold again the second she realized I still wasn't going to hand it over. Here's how it happened. I'm Julian Mercer, a black man from Cedar Park, Texas, and I spent too many years confusing endurance with love. I thought if I stayed steady, worked hard, stayed faithful, kept my temper, I'd earn respect. Instead, I married a woman who treated loyalty like a leash. Her name is Candace Whitmore, and from the beginning, she spoke to me like I was temporary. Not because I lacked character, but because she needed someone she could control. Candace and I met at a community fundraiser in Austin. She was polished, smart, quick, always dressed like she had somewhere more important to be. I liked that she seemed certain. I was building a life from the ground up, doing site work and small renovation contracts, saving every extra dollar. When she laughed at my jokes and touched my arm, it felt like I'd finally been chosen by someone who didn't need anything from me. I didn't see that she liked how grateful I looked. I didn't see that she was taking notes. Her family noticed me the way people notice a stain, quietly, then with judgment. Her mother, Patrice Whitmore, asked what neighborhood I grew up in like it was a credit score. Her brother, Reggie Whitmore, talked to me like I was an intern. Candace would squeeze my hand under the table, not to comfort me, but to keep me from speaking. In the car afterward, she'd say, "Don't take it personally. They just don't know you yet." Then she'd add, "Try harder next time." I tried. I showed up early for dinner. I brought wine Patrice liked. I helped Reggie move without complaining. I watched Candace's face for approval, like it was weather I couldn't predict. The more I tried, the more rules appeared. Don't talk about work, it's boring. Don't disagree in public, it embarrasses me. Don't correct my mother, she's sensitive. Love started feeling like a performance with one audience member who never clapped. I kept thinking the right version of me would finally unlock the right version of her. When I proposed, it wasn't a grand gesture. It was quiet and sincere at a small overlook near Lake Travis. Candace said yes, then immediately started listing what would change, where we'd live, what kind of wedding we'd have, which friends I should phase out. She framed it as adulthood, like I'd been living in a rough draft and she was offering edits. I told myself it was normal. I told myself confident people sometimes sound harsh. I told myself love wasn't supposed to be easy. The prenup came up like it was casual, like she was asking what I wanted for dinner. "My parents will feel better if we do one," she said. It's standard. I didn't come for money, so I didn't feel threatened by paperwork. I just didn't like how she said it, like I was a risk to manage. She booked an appointment in Round Rock with an attorney she called a family friend, then handed me a folder as we sat in a waiting room that smelled like lemon cleaner and old carpet. The attorney was Leonard Price, a black man with a smooth voice and a watch that caught the light every time he moved his hand. He didn't look at me much. He looked at Candace. Candace did most of the talking. "He understands," she said before I'd said anything. "We're keeping things clean." Leonard slid the document toward me and tapped one line with his pen like he was marking a test answer. That line said, in plain language, that I would receive $0 if the marriage ended. I laughed once out of shock. Candace didn't laugh back. She smiled, small and tight, then said, "You don't have anything to lose, Julian. This protects what I'm building." I asked why it had to be 0. Why not something fair? Candace leaned closer and lowered her voice like she was doing me a favor. "Because if you ever get it in your head to leave, you should leave with the same thing you came with. Nothing. That way you'll focus on being a husband instead of being opportunistic." I looked at Leonard Price and waited for him to say something normal, something balanced. He didn't. He said, "This is an agreement between two adults," and gestured to the signature line. Candace's eyes stayed on me like a spotlight. I felt my chest tighten, not about money, but about what she was really asking, to accept in writing that my effort had no value. I hesitated. Candace's tone sharpened. "If you love me, sign it. Don't make this ugly." The ugliest part was that I signed. Not because I agreed, but because I didn't want to start our marriage with a fight in a lawyer's office. I told myself it was a formality. I told myself my work ethic would speak louder than a clause. Candace kissed my cheek afterward like I just passed an exam. In the parking lot, she took a picture of the signed document on her phone, then said, "Good. Now we can move forward." Her relief didn't feel like love. It felt like control settling into place. After the wedding, the disrespect didn't improve, it expanded. Candace started saying my house instead of our home, even though my income paid half the mortgage. She called my projects your little jobs. When I landed a steady contract renovating a small office park near North Austin, she said, "Don't get cocky." If I came home tired, she said I was acting like a victim. If I wanted to rest, she planned something social and scolded me for being antisocial. She didn't hit me. She just erased me slowly. Patrice Whitmore acted like the marriage gave her access to my life. She'd show up unannounced and rearrange my kitchen. She'd criticize the way I folded towels as if it mattered. Reggie would drop by and treat our living room like a waiting area, feet on. The table, remote in hand. Candace never defended me. She would smirk and say, "They're family. Relax." If I looked offended, she'd accuse me of being sensitive. The message was consistent. My discomfort was an inconvenience she expected me to swallow. Money became Candace's favorite weapon because it was quiet. She insisted we use her bank because it was more sophisticated. She convinced me to route client payments through an account she monitored for budgeting. Whenever I asked questions, she'd say I was being suspicious, then punish me with silence. Some months, she'd suddenly decide we needed to tighten up, and she'd cut my personal spending to almost nothing, while still buying herself new clothes. If I pointed it out, she'd say, "I earn it. You just contribute." I tried to fix it like a man who still believed effort could earn softness. I offered counseling. Candace said, "Therapy is for people who can't manage their emotions." I offered date nights. She complained about the restaurant, the parking, the server, and my conversation. I offered to take her on a weekend trip. She said my idea of relaxing was cheap. I started waking up earlier so I could have 1 hour of peace before she started criticizing. I didn't tell my friends. I didn't want pity. I didn't want to admit I'd married someone who didn't respect me. The only person who still made me feel solid was my grandmother, Laverne Mercer, back in Cleveland, Ohio. She raised me after my mom worked double shifts. She was the kind of black woman who didn't brag, didn't beg, didn't explain herself twice. She'd call and ask how I was doing, and I'd lie automatically. "Everything's good," I'd say. She'd pause like she could hear the lie through the phone. "Good doesn't sound like good," she'd say calm. Then she'd change the subject, but I always felt seen. When Grandma Laverne got sick, Candace treated it like bad timing. "Are you really going to fly out again?" she asked, staring at her phone. I told her I needed to be there. She sighed and said, "Fine, but don't expect me to keep your business running while you're gone." I didn't ask her to. I just wanted basic empathy. Candace didn't come with me. She didn't send flowers. She didn't ask about my grandmother's pain. She asked one thing: "Does she have money?" I told Candace my grandmother lived modestly. That was true on the surface. Grandma Laverne had a small house, an older car, and a habit of saving receipts in a drawer. Candace shrugged like she was disappointed. "Then don't let this become a financial drain," she said. I flew to Cleveland alone, sat beside my grandmother's bed, and held her hand while machines hummed in the background. She looked smaller than I remembered, but her eyes were still sharp. "You look tired," she said. I laughed softly and said work was busy. She didn't believe me. "You don't have to stay where you're not valued," she told me quietly, the way elders say truths without drama. I swallowed hard. I wanted to tell her everything, but shame held my throat. She didn't push. She just squeezed my hand and said, "Whatever happens, don't let anybody write your worth down to zero." That sentence hit me like a bell. I wondered if she knew about the prenup. I wondered if she guessed. Before I could ask, a nurse came in, and the moment passed. A month later, Grandma Laverne died. The grief hit me in waves, sharp, then dull, then sharp again. Candace didn't hold me. She watched me cry like she was observing a mess she didn't want to clean. The day I got the call, she asked, "Are you okay?" But her eyes were already calculating. The next morning, she asked, When do you think the will gets read? I stared at her for a long moment. Candace didn't flinch. She just waited like she deserved an answer. The funeral was in Cleveland. Candace didn't come. She claimed work was too hectic, then posted pictures at a brunch in Austin the same weekend. I stood in a church full of family, listening to people describe my grandmother's kindness, and I felt a loneliness that wasn't just grief. It was the realization that I was married to someone who would never share my pain. After the service, an attorney approached me and introduced himself as Derek Sloan, representing my grandmother's estate. He said my grandmother requested I meet him privately. I sat in Derek Sloan's office in Shaker Heights and watched him open a folder thicker than I expected. He spoke gently, with professional care, then said words my mind couldn't hold at first. My grandmother had a portfolio, properties, investments, and a family trust. Not loud wealth, but quiet planned wealth. The total value was a little over $20 million. I felt my mouth go dry. I asked if there was a mistake. Derek shook his head. Your grandmother was precise, he said. She left it to you deliberately. Derek explained what my grandmother built. A handful of small apartment buildings, a few commercial units, long-term holdings she never discussed outside trusted circles. She lived modestly because she believed privacy was protection. She didn't want opportunists in her life or in mine. Derek also said something that made my stomach drop. My grandmother included instructions about safeguarding the inheritance from marital claims. She anticipated pressure, Derek said carefully, and she wanted you protected. He slid a document across the desk, trust terms, and a letter in my grandmother's handwriting. I read the letter with shaking hands. Grandma Laverne wrote that she loved me, that she was proud of me, and that she'd watched me carry too much quietly. She wrote one line that felt like she'd reached through time to grab my collar and steady me. Don't let anyone convince you your love means surrendering your future. Then she wrote that the trust was structured to remain separate property, and that any spouse attempting to access, hide, or manipulate it would trigger protective actions, legal, financial, and immediate. My grandmother didn't say Candace's name. She didn't need to. On the flight back to Texas, I didn't feel rich. I felt exposed. I kept imagining Candace's face when she found out. Not because I wanted her joy, but because I knew the kind of hunger she carried. I rehearsed boundaries in my head and realized I'd never successfully held one with her. When I walked into our house in Cedar Park, Candace looked up from the couch and said, "You're back earlier than I expected." I said, "Yeah." She studied my expression like she was reading numbers off my forehead. I didn't tell her immediately. I moved carefully, the way you move around someone who has proved they'll use anything against you. For a week, I stayed quiet. I answered her questions with calm vagueness. Candace didn't like that. She started picking fights over small things, dirty dishes, the thermostat, my tone of voice. I noticed how often she tried to provoke a reaction, like conflict was how she re-established control. The more neutral I became, the sharper she got. One night she said, "You've been weird since the funeral. Don't bring that energy into my house." 2 weeks later, a large envelope from Derek Sloan arrived. Candace opened it before I got home. She did it casually, as if privacy didn't apply to me. When I walked in, she was standing in the kitchen with the papers spread on the counter. Her eyes were wide, glossy, already performing. "Julian," she whispered, like she'd discovered tragedy. "Why didn't you tell me?" Then she started crying, loud, dramatic, trembling tears. "We could have done this together," she said. "We could have been a team." Her crying felt less like emotion and more like strategy. I didn't comfort her. I looked at the papers and then at her and said, "You weren't a team when my grandmother was dying." Candace's tears stalled for half a second. Then they came back stronger. "That's not fair," she said. "I didn't know. If I had known," I cut in quietly. "If you had known, you would have been nicer." "That's what you mean." Candace's face tightened, and her crying turned into anger instantly. "Don't speak to me like that," she snapped. "I'm your wife." She sat down, wiped her face, and switched to a new approach. Soft voice, hands folded, eyes pleading. "We need to protect ourselves," she said. "We should redo the prenup. The old one was just standard. We should make new plans. Joint plans." She said joint, like it was a sacred word. I remembered her smirk in Leonard Price's office. I remembered, "You get 0. I said, "The prenup stays." Candace blinked. "Excuse me?" I repeated it calmly. "The prenup stays exactly as it is." Candace's eyes hardened. "So you're going to punish me," she said, like I was the cruel one. "After everything I've done for you." I almost laughed. Everything she'd done for me was teach me that love without respect becomes a cage. Candace stood and walked closer. "You're not going to shut me out," she said quietly. "If you try, you'll regret it." There was no remorse in her voice, just a warning. That night, she slept fine, like threats were normal conversation. I lay awake and realized the inheritance didn't change my life. Clarity did. The next morning, I called Derek Sloan from my truck before work. I told him Candace found the paperwork. Derek didn't sound surprised. He said, "Julian, we can tighten the structure immediately." He connected me with a Texas attorney in Austin, Nia Caldwell, a black woman whose voice was calm and sharp like a clean blade. Nia asked direct questions. "Did Candace have access to your accounts? Did you sign anything recently? Did she handle any of your business funds?" I answered honestly and felt my stomach sink as I realized how much access I'd allowed. Nia told me not to panic, but not to hesitate. "Privacy is not cruelty," she said. "Protection is not punishment." She advised separating finances immediately, changing passwords, freezing my credit, and documenting everything: messages, account histories, any suspicious transfers. She also told me something that hit harder than the advice. People who need control hate quiet boundaries. If you enforce one, expect escalation. I drove to my first job site that day, feeling like I was walking around with a storm cloud over my head. I kept working anyway. That's what I always did. Escalation came fast. Candace started suggesting helpful steps. Move the inheritance into a joint account for ease. Add her as trustee for convenience. Let her talk to Derek Sloan so I don't get overwhelmed. When I refused, she became crueler, louder. She insulted my intelligence. She accused me of hiding things. She said I was acting brand new and forgetting who gave you a chance. She called Patrice and put her on speaker without asking me. Patrice's voice filled our living room. "Julian, don't be ungrateful. Candace carried you." I finally said, "Patrice, I'm not discussing my inheritance." Patrice laughed, an ugly sound. "Inheritance," she repeated, like it was a toy she wanted to snatch. "That money is family money now." Candace watched my face, enjoying the pressure. I ended the call. Candace exploded. "You embarrassed my mother," she yelled. Then she said, "You wouldn't even have this if you were smarter. You just got lucky. Don't start acting like you're somebody." At that moment, I understood she didn't love me. She loved having me beneath her. That week, I noticed strange emails in my inbox, password reset attempts, bank notifications that didn't make sense. Candace acted overly casual, like she wasn't paying attention, but I could feel her watching me. One night, I came home and found a sticky note on my desk with a number I didn't recognize. "Call this advisor," Candace said. "He can move things faster." I asked how she got the number. Candace shrugged. "I have resources. Unlike you." I didn't call. I forwarded everything to Nia Caldwell instead. Nia advised me to quietly open new accounts at a different bank and move my business income there. She also advised hiring a forensic accountant, Terrence Hollis, to review my books. I felt embarrassed needing help to undo my own trust, but Terrence didn't judge me. He said, "Control often hides behind organization. We'll find what's real." Within days, Terrence found inconsistencies, client payments that should have hit my accounts but didn't, transfers labeled as tax that weren't tax at all. My hands went cold. Candace hadn't just been rude. She'd been siphoning. Terrence traced the missing money to an account in the name of Candace's cousin, Monique Whitmore, with Candace listed as an authorized user. The amounts weren't huge individually, but over time they added up to a quiet theft disguised as management. When I confronted Candace with one transfer, just one, she didn't apologize. She didn't even deny it. She tilted her head and said, "So? I handled things. You would have messed it up." I asked, "You stole from me?" Candace smiled like the word stole amused her. I protected our lifestyle, she said. That night, I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I went to my truck, sat in the dark, and called Nia Caldwell. My voice shook when I said, I think she's been moving money. Nia didn't gasp. She didn't dramatize. She said, okay, we're going to proceed with precision. She told me not to tip Candace off further. Let her think she's ahead, she said. Paper trails are honest. People are not. I sat there for a long time, staring at my steering wheel, realizing how long I'd accepted disrespect just to avoid loneliness. Nia filed for divorce quietly and properly, timing it with protective steps, restraining financial access, formal notice, and documentation for the court. Candace got served at her office in downtown Austin. She called me immediately, not crying this time, furious. You're trying to ruin me, she hissed. I said no. I'm ending this. Candace laughed, sharp and mean. You think you can leave and keep everything? I'll take you for what you're worth. I almost answered, you wrote my worth down to 0. Instead, I said, talk to the attorneys. Candace did what controlling people do when they lose control. She tried shortcuts. She contacted Leonard Price, the prenup attorney, to revise documents without my consent. She tried to schedule meetings on my behalf. She attempted to access my email again. She also tried to charm Derek Sloan with a phone call. He told me later she acted like I was confused and she was helping. Derek shut her down politely and documented the attempt. Candace didn't learn. She never shows remorse. She only changes tactics when one fails. The first court hearing wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, procedural, and terrifying in its calmness. Candace sat across from me in a tailored suit, face composed, like she was attending a business meeting. She never looked sorry. Patrice sat behind her, arms crossed, giving me a stare that felt like a curse. Candace's attorney argued that the inheritance should be shared as marital benefit. Nia Caldwell responded with facts. The trust structure, the separate property terms, the prenup clause Candace insisted on, and the evidence of Candace's attempts to access the inheritance improperly. The judge didn't raise his voice. He didn't scold me like a TV show. He just asked questions that required truthful answers. Candace struggled with that. When asked why she opened or used accounts linked to my income, Candace said, I manage finances. When asked why those transfers went to her cousin's account, Candace's mouth tightened. It was an arrangement. The judge asked, an arrangement for what? Candace glanced at Patrice like she wanted backup. Patrice didn't speak. Candace finally said, for convenience. The courtroom stayed quiet, and that quiet sounded like consequences arriving. Over the next weeks, Terrence Hollis produced a clean report. Amounts, dates, purposes, patterns. Candace's counsel attempted to paint it as a misunderstanding. But the labels Candace used, tax, budget, household, were inconsistent with actual expenses. Candace grew more aggressive at home because we were still under the same roof while legal steps moved. She criticized my food, my clothes, my breathing. She tried to bait me into anger so she could claim I was unstable. I stopped reacting. I cooked simple meals, locked my documents away, and lived like a guest in my own house until I could leave safely. One night, Candace cornered me in the kitchen and said, "You're nothing without me." Her eyes didn't look hurt. They looked amused. "You're going to come crawling back," she added. "Men like you always do." I realized she truly believed that. Not because she loved me, but because she'd trained me to accept less. I looked at her and said, "I'm done." Candace's mouth twisted into a smile. "We'll see," she said. Then she walked away like she'd already planned her next move. Her next move was illegal. Candace attempted to open a new account using my information and a digital signature she shouldn't have had access to. She expected speed and silence. Instead, the bank's fraud controls flagged it. They contacted me to verify. When I said I didn't authorize it, the bank initiated an investigation. Candace didn't know I knew at first. When she finally realized, she didn't apologize. She shouted that I was sabotaging our future. She said, "You're punishing me because you finally feel powerful." Her anger was a confession without the word sorry. The investigation widened. The bank requested documentation. Nia Caldwell provided it. Terrence Hollis provided it. Derek Sloan provided notes about Candace's attempts to influence the trust. Candace's employer, a finance-adjacent role that required clean compliance, was notified because the bank's report involved professional conduct concerns. Candace thought she could intimidate her way out. She walked into her office like nothing happened, then got called into a meeting with HR and legal. She came home that day and slammed the door hard enough to shake a picture frame. "This is your fault," she said, eyes burning. No remorse, only blame. Candace was placed on administrative leave pending review. She didn't say, "I made a mistake." She said, "They're targeting me." Patrice called and accused me of trying to destroy a black woman's career. I said, "Tell her to stop committing fraud." Patrice went silent for a moment, then said, "You were never good enough for her anyway." Candace sat on the couch listening, chin lifted like she was proud. That was the moment. I stopped hoping for decency. Some people don't apologize because they don't believe they ever do wrong. They only believe they should win. The court's final decisions came without fireworks. The judge upheld the trust protections and the prenup terms Candace demanded. My inheritance remained mine. The judge also addressed the financial misconduct. Candace was ordered to repay misappropriated funds linked to my income and cover a portion of legal costs due to documented bad faith actions. Candace didn't cry in court. She didn't crumble. She stared straight ahead, like she was memorizing who to blame next. Outside, she finally looked at me and said, "You'll regret this." It wasn't a heartbreak. It was a threat from someone who never learned empathy. After the divorce finalized, Candace's career consequences landed heavier. The internal review concluded she violated policies connected to financial integrity. She wasn't marched out in handcuffs. It wasn't sensational. It was worse for someone like her. Quiet loss of access, quiet loss of credibility, quiet doors closing. She lost her position. She tried to pivot quickly, but the questions followed. She blamed me on anyone who would listen. The people who knew her best didn't pity her. They distanced themselves because her actions were too documented to deny. Karma didn't roar. It simply removed her advantages. My comeback didn't look like a victory parade. It looked like me learning how to live without bracing for the next insult. I moved out quietly to a modest rental in Georgetown, Texas, because I didn't need a new zip code to prove anything. I needed quiet. I kept my routine. Early mornings, job sites, steady meals, sleep without arguments. I stopped over-explaining. I stopped apologizing for existing. Some nights, I sat in silence and felt the grief of wasted years. Then I reminded myself, survival isn't the finish line. Building is. I flew back to Cleveland for something that wasn't closure, but direction. I asked Derek Sloan, who my grandmother trusted for the day-to-day operations. That's how I met Yvette Grant, the property manager who'd worked with Grandma Laverne for years. We sat in a small diner off Chagrin Boulevard, and Yvette didn't flatter me. She told me how my grandmother handled business, documented everything, trusted slowly, enforced boundaries without yelling. Yvette slid a worn notebook across the table and said, "She kept this so you wouldn't have to guess. She planned for you to be steady, not loud." The notebook wasn't poetry. It was practical wisdom, tenant policies, vendor contacts, decision rules, reminders about dignity. It was a blueprint written by someone who loved me enough to prepare me. I listened more than I spoke. I took notes like a student. I asked questions without pride. Yvette answered them calmly. Before we left, she said, "Your grandmother believed privacy protects peace. Don't let anyone shame you for being careful." I walked out of that diner feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not excitement, not vengeance, stability. Back in Texas, I set my life up so it couldn't be easily disturbed again. I placed assets into proper structures. I hired professionals who answered to contracts, not emotions. I separated my business from my personal world. I paid down debts and improved my crew's pay quietly because I remembered what it felt like to work hard and still feel disposable. I didn't post announcements. I didn't call old friends to brag. I simply made my life reliable. For the first time, home didn't mean walking on eggshells. It meant rest. Candace tried to circle back months later. Not with remorse. Never that. She sent a message that started with, "We should talk like adults," and ended with, "You owe me for everything I invested." I didn't respond. I forwarded it to my attorney and blocked the number. Patrice left a voicemail saying I was selfish and heartless. I deleted it. Reggie sent a text that said, "Hope you're happy." I didn't answer. Their words couldn't hook me anymore because my worth was no longer something they got to define. The truth is, inheriting $20 million didn't change my character. It revealed everyone else's. Candace cried when she thought the money could be hers, and she went cold when she realized it wouldn't be. She never apologized because she never believed she did anything wrong. Her karma wasn't a tragedy. It was a consequence. Lost access, lost trust, and a future she couldn't bully into shape. My success stayed private on purpose. I didn't need public validation. I needed a life where nobody could write my value down to zero again, and I finally built it. If you made it to the end, you understand the real win wasn't the money. It was freedom. Subscribe for more true-to-life stories where disrespect meets consequences, and comment. Would you have left the moment she said, "Prove you know your place"? Or would you have tried to endure like I did? The end.